Antoine Hoff is here. He's the founder of a company called Kairos, and Kairos suggests that they're going to be helping us make better decisions on energy and the environment with the deeper, measurable insights of their data. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Peter, for the invitation. It's great to be here. Kairos is, I guess, a startup company with 7 years old, based in Paris, but with offices in New York and Houston, as well as London, Singapore, and Bangalore. And we heard a lot about data, transparency, benchmarking, artificial intelligence, and we're about all these things. We're about using AI and new technologies like satellite imaging, but also geolocation data, social media, other sources of input to create transparency about the energy market and about the climate. And to put it very succinctly, we generate today a number of data streams, and they fall into 3 main categories. One is we help companies and express it in terms of our missions. Our first mission is to help companies and to help the society reduce the footprint, the climate footprint. We do it by monitoring emissions of methane. In particular, we created the first platform to monitor super emitters in real time globally. We monitor carbon emissions. We monitor carbon capture in forestry. We monitor forests in different ways. Second mission is to track climate risks, the risks of wildfires, risks of flooding, risks of droughts. And in this space, we work particularly with the insurance industry. We have a major partnership with AXA, big international insurer based in France, but other partners as well. And the third aspect is, that's what I want to focus on today a bit more, is monitoring transition risks. What do we mean transition risks? How do we define transition risks? I think a narrow definition of transition risks is stranded asset risks. It's the risks of investing in incumbent energy sources that would be moved out of the market and ending up with oil fields or gas fields that would no longer be needed, that would be stranded. That's one of the elements, one of the dimensions of transition risks. There's others. There's also risks of stranded demand. Why is there so many risks? Partly because the transition is difficult and it's not predictable, it's not very transparent. We're trying to do in basically one generation what typically would take centuries to do, transition from one energy system to another. The pace of growth of renewable energy is not linear. It's very chunky, it's very unpredictable, very opaque. We don't build up renewable capacity progressively. Every time we start a solar farm or a wind farm, it's disruptive for the incumbent energies, for natural gas market, for example. But if a wind farm or solar farm that's expected doesn't come on the market, that's also disruptive. And then the utilization of renewable capacity is also unpredictable because it depends on the weather. So there's intermittency in renewables, but also variability. We've seen that in Europe in 2021 when there was a lack of wind capacity, winds really, as well as droughts in China and Brazil. And we had huge demand on natural gas in the summertime that prevented the buildup of pre-winter gas reserves. And that really set the stage for the invasion of Ukraine in many ways because President Putin probably expected European customers to be highly dependent on continued gas supplies from Russia. So many risks, financial risks associated with the stranded assets, energy security risks associated with stranded demand. If demand is there, but renewable capacity is not ready and incumbent fossil fuel energy is not there because of underinvestment or other reasons, that can be damaging for the transition because it can undermine confidence in renewable as a resource. Reputational risks associated with greenwashing, and that's become a huge issue recently. There's been many exposés in The Guardian, particularly of bogus forestry assets, but other issues as well. Geopolitical risk as well associated with all this. So how do we deal with all these risks? traditional data sources are not really up to the job. I've worked before we created Kairos in many years at the International Energy Agency. I also worked at the Energy Information Administration in Washington. Those are the two main sources of statistics used by the energy markets as benchmarks, as references. I've seen how the sausage is made. It's not always pretty. There's a lot of guesswork in those statistics. And they're also incapable of adjusting to change. There's no setup currently to track solar development, not really. There's no setup to track the development of new energies. But when demand trends for incumbent energies shift dramatically, traditional statistical agencies and forecasters are unable to adjust to that, because there's so much in statistics that is really modeling and extrapolating from past trends. So when the trends change, incumbent institutional forecasters are often, that's what we see currently with the data on oil consumption at the Department of Energy. There's underestimating of 2 million barrels a day. The adjustment factor is exploding because the system is no longer set up to keep track of the changes going on. So there's a need for new energy sources, for new data sources, and that's what we've been tapping at Kairos. We've been developing algorithms and artificial intelligence systems to incorporate satellite imaging. We use about 20 different fleets of satellites. We're agnostic. We don't own satellites. We're really about processing data from available constellations, preferably free data from government-owned constellations, from the European Space Agency or NASA. And we incorporate geolocation data, and we provide transparency. We provide data that are independent, that are third-party, that are verifiable, and that can help dispel any accusations or suspicion or risk of greenwashing by companies. So I want to talk a little bit about two products in particular that we've developed, which you may find of interest, which track two aspects of the transition and what we call monitoring the transition, helping managing the transition. Those two products track the development of solar energy in the US and the development of battery storage. Why track solar development? Because it's very unpredictable. Here on this slide, you have the forecast in light of ERCOT of new capacity due to come on stream in 2022 that was released last year. And this is a 6-month forecast. By the end of the 6-month period, the forecast was slashed in two. Why? Because the forecast was very much based on the projects that had been submitted by companies, on the permitting that had been granted, but there was no capacity at ERCOT or anywhere else in the US government to track the actual implementation, development of the projects. And that's what we do. And we could see from the beginning of that period that only half the projects announced by ERCOT would come online by the end of the period, and that's exactly what happened. How do we do it? We track every permit, every solar permit in the US. We started with California and Texas because that's where most of the solar farms, the solar projects are located. We have now over a year of experience in those states, and we cover all the projects above 50 megawatts of capacity. And we also now track the rest of the US, where we have a little bit less experience, and we're relying on the capacity on the projects that have been announced and documented by the EIA, by the Energy Information Administration, but we're building our book and expanding our coverage there as well. We're in the early stages of expanding this coverage to Europe and the rest of the world. So how do we do it? We track every single lease, every single permit. We track the location, and we track the development, the different stages of development. We look at the preparation of the site, and then we track the workers as they come in, and we monitor the installation of the solar panels, and we anticipate when the solar panels will be fully installed. We know the capacity of the projects, we know how much space it takes to install all the panels, and we have a forecasting capacity of about 6 months. So we have, it's not just observation, but there's actually a forecasting predictive capacity here that's quite useful and that can help companies anticipate what will happen on the ground. So we use mostly here satellite imaging. This is optical satellites from Sentinel-2 of the European Space Agency's Copernicus constellation. Those satellites have a 4-day refresh schedule. So every 4 days we have new images and we can update our database. We also use geolocation data to track the workers as they come in to put in the panels, and that serves as a confirmation validation of what we see through optical imaging. The other tool that we offer is a very similar product that tracks the buildup of battery storage. And here we currently focus entirely on, again, Texas and California, because that's where 70% of the projects are located. And we currently track 50 of those projects, and we're expanding our coverage as more projects are started and developed. So very similar approach. We monitor the sites of the permits from day one, and we monitor the development. The technology is a little bit different. We use optical imaging, but we also use radar to pick up the metal, which is the early stages. When the metal comes in, that's the first stage of the actual buildup of the battery storage facility. And we don't use much geolocation here. That's not really needed. So it's interesting. I should add that when it comes, for example, to solar projects, the pace of development is sometimes very unpredictable. We've seen projects that take forever to get started, and then they start and they proceed fairly quickly. We've seen projects that get started where the land gets cleared, and then nothing happens for months, sometimes years. We've seen projects where some solar panels are installed, and then everything stops again for months, and they can stay there, or we can resume later on. We don't really make a diagnosis. We don't really go into analyzing or providing hypotheses about what this happens. I think there's some companies that look for subsidies, and once the subsidies are in the bank, halt development and then resume later. But we see this happen. We've seen empirically until now a fairly hard limit on how much capacity can be installed in solar capacity. In Texas, for example, we haven't really seen any company install more than 1 megawatt of panels capacity per day. And for the state as a whole, we haven't really seen anything exceed 7 megawatts per day. Is that a hard limit? Why is that? Is it because of a lack of workforce? Is it because of bottlenecks in the supply chain of panels? That's a limit that hopefully will be overcome. But if that limits continue, that certainly raises questions about the ambitions that we have to build up solar capacity in the state. So that's a visual of what I was just describing, the use of optical radar, but also optical satellite imaging, and also radar to pick up the development of the thing. So based on the size of a project, once the metal starts coming on the site, we have a very good handle on how long it will take for the panel to be completed and when it will come into operation. So that's two products, monitoring basically the deployment, the pace of deployment of renewable energy. We do this now in the US. We're expanding that coverage to the rest of the world, starting with Europe. We're expanding also to other forms of renewable energy. We're looking at wind farms, and we're developing a product to track the deployment of wind farms and also the construction of wind blades for wind turbines. But that's just, again, some of the projects, some of the products that we offer. We also monitor the incumbent energies, crude oil, natural gas, and coal. What is the use case, by the way, of these products? There's several of them. Those two products I just described are very useful for gas and power traders because they do need to figure out when capacity will come on stream or when delays will be incurred. So every time a solar farm comes in, it's a demand destruction for natural gas, but every time there's a delay, It's added demand for gas that may not be otherwise predictable. So very valuable for gas traders, for electricity traders. It's also valuable for equity traders, investors in solar capacity, in solar companies, to monitor the progress of the investment of the companies in their portfolios, and to improve the performance of their portfolios, to benchmark the performance of different companies, to provide guidance on how to build their portfolios. We had one company that was in the course of making investor presentation when our measurements came, when we provided transparency about their projects, and they had to revise their investor deck after our report came out to acknowledge a significant delay in one of their projects. So very valuable for investors because because of the lack of information coming from the companies themselves. It's also valuable for operators to provide competitive intelligence, to get clarity on when competitors will be able to connect to the grid and where they stand in the queue and what the queue might look like. And finally, it's valuable for regulators because it provides transparency about what's happening to the system as a whole. Where are the bottlenecks? How long are things really taking? What is the pace of deployment of renewable, and how quickly are we likely to achieve renewable targets? So other products include, as I said, monitoring climate risks, as well as the detection of climate, the climate impact of human activity. And I'm happy to discuss that, but that's what I focused on today. So happy to take questions. Thank you.
Time for about one question right here.
Hi, good morning. Actually, I have two questions. One is, what is your business model? If you can just give a highlight. And second, do you compare what you see with what those companies might publish publicly? Like Acciona, for example, they probably release some information publicly about that site, right? Do you compare the accuracy of your what you see?
Yeah, so comparing the accuracy is, of course, but the question is, how do you benchmark the accuracy? It's not always by comparing with what the companies are saying. Companies are not always very transparent about what they're doing. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, once we had one particular example that I just mentioned of a company that was providing information that was kind of lacking to their investors, and then when we came out with our report, they had to adjust their presentation and correct to acknowledge the delays we had identified. So, but it's a fair question. It's often difficult to benchmark because oftentimes we measure things that are not measured anywhere else. When it comes to crude oil inventories, it's easy to monitor the performance of our measurements in Cushing, Oklahoma, for example, the delivery point of the NYMEX contract, because the EIA provides reports that are fairly accurate, presumably, and we forecast the Cushing report 5 days in advance. So the EIA publishes Cushing numbers on Wednesdays. We provide that number on the Friday prior, and we have 99% accuracy. So the 1% of difference, I'm not sure who's wrong. Maybe it's us, maybe it's the EIA. When it comes to methane measurements, it's more difficult because oftentimes there's nothing whatsoever. So, we work with scientific partners. We publish in scientific journals. We're really very much like a research lab. We've authored papers in Science. We've authored papers in Nature, other peer-reviewed scientific journals. And in the case of methane, where it's very difficult to benchmark accuracy, Stanford University did a blind test, and they did a controlled release of methane, or several controlled releases of methane in Arizona, and asked a number of companies to detect the releases and to measure them. And we came out with flying colors. We picked up every single one, and we measured them with very good accuracy. We were like the best performer in the study. That study is in preprint. It's not officially published, but it's available on the web in preprint. So in the business model, basically, we have, so it's kind of a challenge for a startup because we're really 17 or 20 startups in one, and we have many different products, many use cases, many users. But essentially, there's three main categories of ways we're helping our customers. We sell data on a subscription basis, data sets, basically, which can provide to our customers via Excel or API or whatever. We also do a fair amount of bespoke work for major customers, where we look at things a little bit more customized, a little bit closer to consultancy, but leveraging all the technologies that we have. And then we have a business model which is enterprise software, where we provide large customers with access to all our facilities, and they can use our technologies in a way that provides a lot of confidentiality and transparency. We don't necessarily see exactly what they do with it, but they can integrate in one platform all the various users, various technologies that we provide.